Well, hi again. I just finished doing a video for you a little earlier today, and I figured since I still had my good clothes on and a little bit of that makeup left from the last video, I'd just go ahead and tell you another story. It's one I've been wanting to tell for a long time. It came about because of a lady who made a special request. But before I tell you the story, what I want you to know is my sister just called me and she said, Kentucky's supposed to see the Northern Lights tonight. I've never seen the Northern Lights, and I'm on the 8th floor of condominium. I can look straight out at the sky. I've already got my blind pulled up, and I've got a big picture window, so I'm going to watch for the Northern Lights. I think they're supposed to be showing between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. So I want to keep looking the direction of the windows so I don't miss the Northern Lights. And if I do, I'll be sure and tell you about it. Now, what I want to talk to you about in this video is a stove. It's a stove I once had. A lady requested for me to talk about my old stove. Now, the one she was talking about is in my kitchen now. It's over 50 years old, but it looked like any other electric stove. Nothing special about it. But I did have a stove once that I do want to tell you about. And it excites me just remembering that stove. My nose itches all the time. Okay, I have to give you a little background here. My kids were both out of high school. One's working, the other's getting ready to go to the University of Kentucky, and that means I'm going to be left with an empty nest. I'm a little worn out with my job, what they call burnout. And I decided I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to move back home. I'm going to buy a house there. And I'm going to open up a craft shop. Now, I'd been working with crafts my entire life. Loved to work with crafts. I did a lot of sewing, a lot of decorating. And I'm in my heaven as long as I'm creating something I enjoy it. So I decided now's the time to do what I want to do, not what I have to do. Of course, have to do means I gotta have a job that has an income. All right, I did sell my house, and I did find a house back home. It happened to be in the business district of town, and it had a building behind it. The lady who lived in the house had a beauty shop there. This was going to work out fine for me. I can turn that beauty shop into a craft shop, and we'd see what would happen after that. All right, I've already sold my house, and I'm back home. I'm at the house that I just bought. And they're moving out the furniture. The moving trucks are out front. They're packing everything. So I'm talking to the lady, and I said, I noticed her stove in the kitchen. This was a big kitchen, nice big kitchen, a lot of cabinets. But in that kitchen was a very unusual stove. Well, the thing about my moving was my stove had been the built-in stove with a wall oven. That meant I had to have a new stove. So I said, are you planning to take this stove with you? She said, well, I suppose. I hadn't thought about it. And I said, would you like to sell it? Would you sell it to me? Because I'm going to have to buy one anyway. I'd already bought a new refrigerator for the kitchen. Well, I suppose I could. How much would you take for the stove? Oh, $75. Well, I'm telling you, I got a lump in my throat. $75 for this stove. Oh, now I've got to describe this to you. First, my house was on the corner, and everybody came in through the back door. Had a little screened-in back porch. Little glider would be sitting on that porch, and anybody that came to visit came through the back door. And the minute you opened the door, the first thing you saw was the stove sitting over against the wall. Now, it would cause you to stop and look. Okay, I bought that stove. It was a TAPPAN Range. Now, let's go back to about 1960. A regular electric stove or gas stove then would cost $200-300. Now, I'm not talking about the expensive ones. I'm talking about the average. That's how much you would have paid, $200-300. This stove, of course, had special qualities about it. There's no question about it. So when I got moved into the house, I called the furniture store, and I said, I've got this stove, and it has 2 ovens, and the thermostat is not working in one of the ovens. Would you have thermostat that would fit this oven? So the man I was talking to was the electrician at the store, and he said, I know that stove. Yes, he said, I'll order the thermostat for you and let you know when they come in. He did, and he called, and then he came down, and he was ready to put the new thermostat in. And I said, do you know anything about this stove? He said, as a matter of fact, I do. He said there were 3 people in town that bought this stove back in about 1958, 59, and it was now 1978. Now, I had an 18-year-old stove. I said, well, what can you tell me about it? He said, well, 3 people bought the stove. Well, who were they? One was the doctor. He told me the name. I knew the doctor. Another was a lady who taught piano lessons at the school. She bought the second one. And, of course, the lady that I bought my stove from had the 3rd stove. Well, my sister, she knew that stove because my house was right across the street from church, and all the ladies going to and from church, they would stop at this lady's house, talk, and my sister said she remembered that stove because the ladies in town were fascinated with the stove, and she was always baking cakes and making things, and they would stop and share them. They would always comment on her beautiful TAPPAN Range. It was an electric stove. Now, if you notice the little preview film movie, I don't know what you want to call it, just a little preview. Well, what was that? Well, anyway, in this preview, you're going to see some stoves. 2 pictures are of my stove. The other 3 pictures are of a stove from the TV series Bewitched. Now, I know you watched Bewitched. I watched Bewitched. Everybody watched Samantha. Samantha had a Frigidaire stove. And I watched the program mainly to see if she was going to go in the kitchen where her stove was because it was the most fascinating thing I'd ever seen. And you didn't get to see much of the stove. Now, her stove had 2 ovens above, the big oven. You had one big oven, and then you had another one a little smaller. Now, the handles for those glass doors was down at the bottom. You got hold of the handle and lifted the door up on each oven. That is how her stove worked. Her burners, there were 4 of them, and they kind of zigzagged on the burners. In front of the burner was a chopping block, strip chopping block. Now, you could lift that up a little bit, pull it out, and drop it down if it was in your way while you were cooking. But if you weren't cooking and you wanted to hide the burners, sometimes you think, well, company coming, oh, I've just been cooking and this stove is a mess. I gotta clean up the stove. No, you punch this little button, you push the burners back under those 2 ovens, and you couldn't see them. You had the cutting board there, nice, clean cutting board. Now, this stove sat on a cabinet. The cabinet was beneath it that held all of your pots and pans. That's the way the TAPPAN range was. Tell you a few more features. You could set your coffee pot on the burner, fill it with your coffee and your water the night before, plug it in. It has a timer. When you got up in the morning, you went to the kitchen to fix your breakfast. Your coffee was already made. It was ready to drink. That was one nice feature. The ovens had timers. You could put a roast in that big oven. You could go town shopping, go to a movie, whatever. You set the timer. When you got home, the oven is turned off, and you've got a roast ready to be eaten, still hot. There were other features about this stove I never did even learn. I couldn't understand how to do it, but there were little plugs over here and a plug over here, a button here and a button here, and then timers for, oh my gosh, I never saw anything like it in my life. And I was enjoying the stove. It was just before Thanksgiving that I had moved in. Couldn't wait to use my TAPPAN range. And I told my family, I said, okay, Thanksgiving is going to be at my house this year. My sister brought a big ham, great big ham. We put it on the rotisserie inside the big oven. I'd never used a rotisserie in my life. Didn't know the first thing about it. But we stood and watched that ham roll round and around very slowly. And that's what we had for Thanksgiving dinner that day. Now, every time someone came to visit, knocked on the back door, opened the door, they stepped in and they stopped and they looked. Where in the world did you get that? They couldn't believe I paid $75 for a stove that originally cost $1,000. Now, I was high class. That put me right up there with the doctor and the piano teacher and whoever else could afford $1,000 stove. After I left there. Of course, my shop had burned and I had to find work, this, that, and the other, so I sold that house. But I took the stove with me. I moved to Tennessee. My sister lived in Tennessee. She said, come on down here, we'll find you a job. Okay. So I moved to Tennessee. The stove went with me. Now I was there for 19 years, and I used that stove the whole time I lived there, and everybody that walked in my house had to see my stove. It's amazing how an appliance can be so exciting. Who gets excited over stoves and refrigerators? Not many people that I know, but nobody had seen one like this one. So when I retired from my job, I decided there's no reason for me to continue living in Tennessee. I'm going to move back to Lexington. My daughter's living there, my son's nearby. It's best for me to go where I've got family. But I couldn't bring the stove with me. There was no place to put that stove. I walked away, leaving my beautiful TAPPAN Range sitting in a rental house. I could almost cry today over that. Never had anything in the way of furniture, monetary things like that, to have such an impression on me. But it was one of those things that in any other circumstances, I could never have had a stove like that. I was just lucky. And the lady, she had used it for years. She'd used it for 18 years. So she was ready to give it up. I wish you could have seen it. I love cook. I cooked on it just because I enjoyed having a stove like that. It was fun to cook on that stove. Now you go back, be sure, and go back and look at the preview of this video again. The first picture, I think, shows my stove, but it isn't really my stove. It looks just like my stove, but it was in a magazine. And I kept that magazine and took a picture of the stove because that's my stove. The other picture, the second picture, is actually my stove. I've got a few things sitting on top of the, I think I had a little coffee pot, something sitting on the chopping block. The burners are moved back under the oven. And on top of the stove, I've got a great big, those big enameled roasting pans, you know, had big lids on them. This one was white, trimmed in red. Loved those roasting pans. So that's the one that when you see it, there's a glare on one of the oven doors. But the difference between Samantha's Frigidaire stove and mine was her oven doors opened up this way. My oven doors opened this way. I had the big oven and I had the little oven. And there's so many features about it. It was just an exciting thing to have in your house. But like I said, I had no place to put the stove when I moved back to Kentucky. I left it sitting in the kitchen. Now that was 23 years ago. I still wonder, is that stove in that kitchen not today? If I could get my hands on that stove, I'd sit in the living room. Yeah, you think I'm kidding? I'd sit in the living room. It'd be a conversation piece. Now, did you ever watch Bob Vila? He used to be on this old house on Home Gardens. I think it was Home Gardens. It might have been PBS. Always remodeling an old house. And he was in California in one of those beach houses that was being completely remodeled. And he's going through and he's describing this and he's describing that and what he's going to have to do here and there. And he walks into the kitchen, and guess what was sitting there? The TAPPAN range, just like the one I had. And you know what that man said? We got to get rid of this thing. If I could have put my fist through that television screen, I'd have popped him right in the nose. I thought, how can you get rid of something so nice that any lady would love to have had in her kitchen, and you're going to get rid of it? I never liked Bob Vila after that. I thought, you don't have good taste after all. Yeah, that's my opinion. That's how I looked at it. Now, to the lady that wanted to know about my old stove, I hope you've enjoyed the story about this stove, because it was older than the one that you were talking about. And it's still sitting in the kitchen, and it needs a good cleaning right now. And I'll be glad to let you in my front door anytime you want to come in and clean it up for me. That takes care of that, and I'm going to get over close to my window. Let's hope I get to see the northern lights. Have you seen the northern lights? I've never been anywhere near, what am I trying to say? Alaska. I've seen so many videos and things on TV and people talking about having seen the northern lights. Maybe tonight is my night, and let's hope if we see them here in Kentucky that they're bright. And I'll tell you all about it on my next video. So I'm glad you're with me again. 2 videos in a row. Well, that may be a little bit much, but you can space your time between watching me. And I sure am glad you're out there watching me. And I want you to get your friend to subscribe to me. I'm trying to build up my subscription list, and it's growing fast. I couldn't believe this past month I got about 500 new subscriptions. That's exciting. Exciting to an old woman that's getting ready to be 87 years old. Is that good enough for you today? It's good for me, and it sure makes me feel good. And I'm anxious to see what happens tonight. So I'm going to say goodbye, get my drink out, and I'm going to sit back and hope I don't fall asleep before the Northern Lights show. Good night to all of you.